Unilever now is taking all this benefit to be involved in sustainable development, understanding that is the new path, the new era. How you face this? How is your position and your plans?
Well, it's clear now, increasingly clear to more people, that the enormous population growth we've seen, the enormous wealth creation that has happened, has also put a pressure on our planetary resources. We are in a situation now that we are starting to see the effects of hitting planetary boundaries, and one of them is obviously climate change. And this Terry conference especially deals with the issue of climate change. For us at Unilever, we have said if we want to grow in the future and be sure that we can grow for the long term, which is really the sustainability part of it, and include more people in the economic process, we need to have a different business model than our current models. Our current plan A, as you call it, of all of our businesses has been successful, but it's probably not going to be successful long term, and we're starting to see these effects showing up. So we said, let's make a business plan where we decouple our growth from the environmental impact, total decoupling, and where we increase our positive social impact.
In your business plan, do you already have a timetable and return of investment in this new?
No, sure. We have discovered, for example, we've made what is unique about our plan of totally decoupling from environmental impact and increasing the total social impact is that we take co-responsibility of the total value chain. Most companies with CSR will stay within their own offices or their travel or their factories. We say no. If you're in the food business like us, we go from the farm, the small agriculture, smallholder farmer, to the fork. And we take co-responsibility of all the issues in the value chain. Means sustainable agriculture, climate smart agriculture. It means food waste. It means on the other side of the equation, issues like obesity or deforestation. Now, interestingly, if you look at the food chain, it's a humanitarian question. We still have 800 million people going to bed hungry. And we should be able to solve that, especially as we're wasting 30 to 40% of the global food supply. It also accounts for 15% of global warming because of deforestation. In fact, some people would argue that if we could fix the global food chain from the farm to the fork, if you want to, and we have all the technology to do that, all the capabilities to do that already today, we could actually solve an issue of about 30% of the global warming. So that is very important to us to show to the world, by virtue of our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, that we can run the businesses in responsible ways and actually also run it in economically viable ways.
Now the corporations are opening mind because there is an opportunity, huge opportunity in this new era, but the corporations change fast. You find, you have vision, you find a plan, and you just do. But you find some boundaries when you want to implement in different countries that are not developed enough.
So obviously, as the business is looking for more sustainable business models to solve the issues of food security, poverty alleviation, climate change, shortage of water, these are enormous issues that the business alone cannot solve. First of all, the most important thing is that business is part of the solutions, that the CEOs make the commitments, they have the awareness, but also put concrete plans in place for their companies. Now, why is it so important that business plays a part in these solutions? It's very easy to see for few reasons that become very obvious. The first one is that in the global economy, business is about 60% of the global economy, 80% of the financial flow, 90% of the job creation. If you don't include business, you're not going to solve it. And then increasingly, businesses themselves are increasingly understanding that if we don't solve these issues, we don't grow. In a country like China, you already see that growth is limited because we're hitting planetary boundaries. Consumers are asking the same. The internet has given enormous transparency. They're asking for companies that operate responsibly into the value chain, treat their people fairly, don't pollute unnecessarily the environment. And increasingly, they're actually putting their money where their mouth is. We see the same in the financial community, where investors are worried about corporate reputations, which we have seen going up and down like a yo-yo, where they are worried about companies being too exposed to carbon at a time that when we can afford it the least. So the forces are coming together. Where business needs help is a few things. Business cannot do it alone, nor will all businesses do it automatically. There will always be free riders, etc. And business has an interest in being sure that standards are moving up, that incentive systems are the positive ones and not the negative ones. And that's why you want to work with governments to ensure that you put the policy frameworks in place, the right incentive systems. An example is carbon. We still have in this world about 800 billion to 1 trillion of perverse carbon subsidies, that if we would put that same money against green energy, we would not only solve the issues of climate change much faster, but we would also actually help the poor much more. There's increasing evidence of that. So how do you work with governments together, NGOs, civil society, to make these transformative changes that we're talking about?
This is interesting because this documentary is based on education. We believe that environmental education has to be learned from K to 12, not just in the perfect programs that Harvard or Yale University have, but more simple but deeply in the general education to change the setup mind, to change the blueprint in the new generation. Now we have the smart society. The stockholders are chasing you, are checking you if you are in the green in the green list or not.
Right.
But the company is bidding to this new generation? Are you doing something in education? I know it has to be in the relation or public affair, but are you thinking?
Yeah. No, I don't think if we want to move to more sustainable business models, we have to involve the young. Very important. Actually more important outside of Europe and the US than people think. If you look at the world population, 80% of the world population is going to live outside of Europe or the US. Currently, the average age is or the half of that population is below 25 years old. So these people are very young, and they understand that they might be half of the population now, but they're going to be 100% of the population tomorrow. And companies ought to be interested in these young people because they're also going to be their future consumers, they're going to be their future workforce, they're going to be major players in future governments or in communities that need to interact with companies. So to invest in young people is a very important thing. Now, young people also understand that this world needs to be run, or business models need to be changed a little bit more than they've probably done in the past. Most of the young people in the emerging markets are seeing every day the effects of exclusion from the workforce, the trouble to find employment, the climate change effects, the lack of water, the natural disasters that are increasingly there. And they are very internet savvy people. The young people are connected more across the world via mobile phone or other devices more than at any time in the history. They see what happens in other countries, they do their own research, and they're very well aware of the negative effects that companies can have, but also the positive effects that companies can play to find a solution. And what you now see overwhelmingly, like in a company like Unilever, that people want to join us, and we are the third most sought after employer in the world right now. They want to join us because they want to make a difference. They want to work for a company that has a positive influence on society, not a negative influence. They want to work for companies that give to make things better, not companies that take. They want to work for companies that care about more than just the bottom line, that care about every stakeholder being better off on a continuous or sustainable basis. So it helps enormously to attract the right people. It also helps enormously to obviously build the reputation in a company. And it takes enormous risks away as well as costs. So from all angles that you look at it, it's important. Now, why do you need to get into the education? Because a lot of the consumer habits are formed already at a very early age. For example, there's a big issue in the world on sanitation. We still have 1 in 20 children that doesn't make it past the age of 5 for simple issues like pneumonia or diarrhea that you can really cut in half by the simple act of hand washing. But you have to educate consumers. And the best way we have found out to educate is to go into the schools, to talk to the young children, have programs of habit change. And then these children come home and influence their parents, actually, and you change society. So the power of the young is enormous. That's why it's absolutely crucial that also in the education, very early on, we put education not only about the math and science, but also about the living in harmony, if you want to, with the general state of the world. At that point in time in the educational cycle of an individual, I think it will be very easy to get that adoption or that awareness. And the earlier we start, the better we're off.
I will ask you for a message as a successful business person, successful corporate person. I hear Irina Bokova, she is the head of UNESCO. She said that UNESCO believe in alternative energy that came from the ingenuity of the society. And for us, face like the new era, the environmental era, invite the new generation all the opportunities that are behind. It's not just to plant lettuce in your, not to do hydroponic, no, more than that. How you can tell the young generation they can be successful business, but thinking in sustainability.
Well, most of the changes in history, actually, if you go back to that, or certainly many of the changes, were actually done by very young people, from the Jeanne d'Arcs, or the Richard Bransons in their own industries, or the Bill Gateses for the modern days. These people were in their early 20s. So age is not a limitation. In fact, we see a lot of social enterprises coming up, a lot of bright ideas from young people around how we can create a more inclusive, sustainable world for all. When I was working as a member of the high-level panel for the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals, we did enormous reach-out efforts to all parts of society. And what surprised me the most was the responses we got from young people talking about the world they wanted. And interestingly, especially from regions like Africa. So young people are enormously engaged, are enormously creative, often work better together than what we've done, and master the technology that you need to drive some of these things forward. So enrolling these people early on in the process of making our societies more sustainable is an imperative. We would otherwise not be able to achieve that. Because they own the future, even more so than we do, they're highly motivated. And anytime we enroll them, they not only make their major contributions, but they enrich our lives and give us confidence, actually, that we can tackle some of these major challenges that are out there and tackle them for the benefit of humanity now and for generations to come. We've set ourselves some audacious goals on climate change this year, which is the COP21, on developing these sustainable development goals, which should cover the next 15 years of human development. They happen in the same year, not by coincidence, in my opinion. I believe we are sitting in a period of history that is instrumental and we will never see again. And that is the moment that we have as an opportunity now to once and for all eradicate poverty in a more sustainable and equitable way. And at the same time also be the last generation that has to deal with the consequences or the effects of climate change. So if we do this well and if we do that responsibly, the people before us didn't succeed. And if we do it well and responsibly, the people after us don't have to. And we can say, yes, we were that generation. We were that generation that alleviated poverty. We were that generation that resolved or reversed the effects of climate change. And yes, we were that generation that says we were the ones that created a better future for all, including for generations yet to come. That ought to motivate all of us. I think it gets to the heart of humanity. It gets to the heart of what makes us all work. We're here in India, which is has a big festival called the Daval Festival. And interestingly, it's a very spiritual festival of man in harmony with nature. And we would be very well advised to maintain that harmony. If we want to have a battle with nature, there's only one thing I can tell you for sure. Nature is going to win, not man. And if we are respectful and find that balance and treat all nations, all people with the same respect and human dignity, we are in for a very good world that we can be proud of, and a very prosperous world for everybody. And that's the world I'd like to live in, and that's the world for which I give a lot of energy to get to, for myself, but more importantly, my children and future generations.